quick video on installing privacy pocket door hardware. I try and make my rectangular cutout before paint, that way I'm not damaging the paint after the fact. The most critical cuts that you make with your jigsaw are going to be on the face of the door edge. You want to take your jigsaw off of the orbital setting and make a nice easy plunge cut up across that cut line. I also recommend scoring it beforehand. For privacy hardware, you also want to drill a hole in the back of the cutout. I'll show more on this in a little bit. Then you want to insert your pocket door hardware into your square cutout. Hopefully it's a nice snug fit and it'll look nice and crisp. It's very important to use a square for alignment to make sure the front of the hardware is even with the front edge of the door as well as square with the door. You want to be very careful not to strip or damage your screws and use a self-centering bit to pre-drill the holes. One thing that I have found that I have to do is to drill with a spade bit, drill a hole a little bit further back. You can see this round hole in the back. If you do your cutout where you're supposed to, you can't cut too far back or else you'll cut into where that screw hole is and your screw won't have anywhere to bite into. But you can see here, this locking mechanism coming up and down. If you don't drill this out back there, it will hit this back here and it won't work. When you go to mortise the latch plate, it's extremely important that you get it mortised at the proper height. To do this, I engage the latch and then close the door into the jamb to make a dent. Once you have your dent, lower that latch and then sight through the edge of the door and get your mortise plate exactly where it needs to be so that that latch will catch on the interior edge of your mortise plate. Also, make sure that you have your mortise plate flipped in the correct orientation. It is not symmetrical, as you can see. You want the fatter portion to be at the bottom so it catches the latch. The reason that I have the mortise plate screwed on backwards is so that I can screw it to the jamb and then very carefully cut around it with a sharp utility knife. That'll cut the paint. I want to go in about 1/16 of an inch and then I'll mortise that out later. You will need to use some type of countersink bit in the area behind the plate where the screws go. It's going to be a little bit deeper than what your actual mortise will be. You need to do that in order to make the plate sit flat. Then of course we'll also need to go a little bit deeper with our mortise where the actual latch mechanism will need to hook into the mortise plate. This is a wonderful little tool for doing these shallow mortises like this. It is called a Rabbet Plane and it works great. It's got an adjustable depth and you can just kind of chip away at this mortise very carefully and you can get a very precise mortise at an extremely consistent depth without having to use a router or a jig or something like that. Make sure that you're very careful with the screws that come with this hardware. The finish on these screws is very thin and the screws are very soft, so make sure you have good contact with the Phillips bit and the screw whenever you're drilling these down. I can't stress enough how important it is to get your plate set at the proper height at the very beginning of this process. If you don't, your door won't latch whenever you're finished. So I hope this video helps you guys out. I used to do these with just a chisel when I first started out. Then I found these router planes and they work great for this. Just a lot easier to use, a lot more consistent depth. You get a nice flat depth across the whole thing, which is hard to do just doing by hand with a chisel. So recommend these. These aren't fun to do, but this is the best way I've found to do them so far. Again, at this point in the process, the home is finished, so I don't really want to be getting out a router and throwing sawdust everywhere. And there's only usually, a couple privacy pocket doors, maybe a handful of them. So it's easier just to keep my setup lean and efficient and use something like this rather than getting a vacuum out and trying to use routers. Just to give you a closer view of this thing, you have your blade right here. It's a long shaft here. This screw will adjust your depth, and then there's a set screw on the back that locks the blade at the depth that you want it. So works really well. Got two nice handles here to grab onto, makes it easy to control. Nice little router plane.